introducing our first video of our urban veggie gardening series. Today I want to talk about planning your garden. It's getting to be that time of the year where everybody's getting a little antsy and wanting to start thinking about what we're going to be doing outside when this maybe snowstorm is done. And it's a great time of the year to just do a little research and stay nice and warm while you're doing it. My first advice to you is to stay small if this is your first year or maybe your second year and things didn't go as planned last year. It's easy to become overwhelmed by the time and the space that a large garden requires of you. There are multiple types of gardening that you can do. Raised bed gardening is great. Gardening is the more traditional option. And even if you're just in a rented house or an apartment, you still have options for growing your own food with container gardening. The most important question that I always ask somebody when they talk about starting a vegetable or an herb garden is, what do you like? It does not make any sense to grow something that you're not going to eat. Or that you don't really like. Even if you think it's good for you, you're probably not going to eat it. The second question is, what are you going to be doing with the produce? Are you going to just be eating it fresh as it comes out of the garden? Or are you going to be canning, preserving, drying, freezing, something like that? That kind of helps you determine how big of a garden you need and how much additional supplies you're going to require. Another thing to think about is it more expensive for you to grow the product than to purchase it as a high quality, like at a farmer's market or in an organic section at the grocery store? There are some things that really, they just are kind of hard to grow, and they can be fairly expensive to grow. Things like celery. You can get that fairly inexpensively at the garden or at the farmer's market or at the grocery store, and it can take a long time and be somewhat expensive to grow in your own. But fresh celery is so much better than what you're going to find in the grocery store for the most part. Will you be using Transplant that you have purchased at the garden shop, or will you be growing your own from seed? This is an important question because you'll need to start your transplants earlier than you will need in the house, than you'll need to purchase them at the garden store. We recommend not purchasing your transplants until you're basically ready to plant your garden, so that's in May. If you're going to start your seeds yourself for things like tomatoes and peppers, we will talk about that in our next video a little bit more, but that's going to be in February, March a little bit, so kind of put that on your timeline. Will you be doing in-ground, raised bed, or container gardening? In-ground is going to generally allow you to start the least expensively. If you have a little patch of grass that you want to dig up and put a little garden in there, it's very simple to do that. All you need to do is take the sod off of it and till it up. It's the easiest to expand or shrink later on, depending on how it goes for you, and has the basic nutrients in the soil and basic water holding capacity already there for you. The only thing I would say is that soil structure does matter. If it's boggy all the time, most vegetables are not going to like that. And if it dries out super fast, you are going to have to water that a lot more often. If you're going to think about raised beds, that is a great option because it allows you to correct compacted or poor soils right away. You don't have to work it in gradually. There's no fungal or insect problems already there from plants that may have previously been in there. You don't need to strip off the existing sod, which can sometimes be a chore. It is one of the more expensive ways to do gardening, but once you get it set up, it's a one-time cost basically. Containers are a great option if you have a small space or if you want to start with just one little project, maybe that tomato plant out on the deck that everybody likes. There's almost nothing you can't grow on your patio as long as you have a large enough pot. It also keeps your veggies and your herbs close enough to the house that you actually remember to use them when you're doing your meal prep. And it can be mixed with annuals too to make them pretty. They don't have to be just a utilitarian pot that has a random tomato plant in it out there. You can plant other things around it to make it pretty as well. It does, however, limit the amount of produce that you're going to produce. So if you have large expectations, more containers or a larger area may be needed. There's also lots of other types of gardening. You can do square foot gardening. You can look into straw bale gardening. There's also companion planting guides that let you get more out of a square foot of soil or container. And I would definitely recommend doing a little bit of research on some of those options as well, if you're not quite sure exactly what you're going to be doing. Most vegetables do require 6 to 8 hours of sun. There are a few that are shade tolerant, things like spinach and some of your leafy greens. Even peppers will tolerate a little bit less sun, but in general, most are going to need 6 to 8 hours or all day sun. Garden layout. I'm just going to touch on this a little bit. We're going to do another video later on that goes into that, but I do want you to start thinking about maybe doing a list at least of the vegetables and herbs that you want to do, or a diagram of how your garden is going to be laid out. Just a couple of tips that I've come across as I've done my own garden. Run your rows east and west if at all possible. This makes sure that your front of your rows and the back of your rows get as much sun as each other. So you don't have crops that are short in the back and high in the back or in the front. Plant tall and trellis crops to the north if at all possible. Again, your sun is basically going to be coming from the south mostly, so you don't want to have short little plants behind your tall corn crop. They are not going to get nearly as much sun as the rest of them are. Be sure all areas of your garden are accessible to you. This is especially important if you are doing a raised bed. There's nothing worse than planting your whole entire raised bed and then realizing that you can't actually reach the middle of your bed to weed it or harvest it. Most people are about a 4-foot raised bed width, and you can still reach in there and do all the maintenance that you need to do. Properly spacing your plants. This is really important because it's easy to become overwhelmed if you have insect or fungal issues, or if you can't get into weed or put a rototiller through the rows. Tomatoes, I recommend 2 to 3 feet apart if you're doing in-ground or raised bed, and only 1 plant per pot if you're doing a container. Peppers, I recommend 1 to 2 feet apart or up to 3 plants per pot. And then most row crops, you're going to do 3 feet between the rows and space seeds according to your package directions. There is a wealth of information on any seed packet, and I really recommend that you go ahead and look through that before doing any planting. Don't forget to thin those seeds as they start coming up. It really makes a big difference, especially in root crops, things like carrots and beets. The crops themselves get much larger, even though you feel like you're pulling a lot of your seed out. The end product is definitely worth that little bit of effort. And then finally, just a few things to think about as far as what you're planting. If this is your first go around at gardening, I definitely would stay in some of the easier categories. Beans and beets, corn, zucchini, squash, cucumbers, peas, lettuce, and spinach. Those are great crops to start with if this is your first run at gardening. Basil, cilantro, parsley, and mint are great herbs to start with. Of course, we carry everything under the sun here at Down to Earth. And then intermediate plants, or if somebody wants to take on a little bit of a challenge, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, artichoke, rosemary, and lemon balm are all things that maybe just need a little bit more time or product to keep them growing well. Container gardens should have potting soil or a mix of potting soil and compost in them, so we need to make sure that they are draining well. Just something to keep in mind. You're not going to be able to just put regular soil into those pots. Same thing for raised gardens. We definitely recommend doing compost and peat moss for your raised gardens over the traditional mineral soil that you can just dig up out of your yard. We have lots of books to help you go ahead and figure out what you want to do as far as what type of gardening you want, and also all of the seed starting supplies, seeds, and garden equipment that you could possibly need for this season and into the next several. Thank you for tuning in today, and keep watch for our next 2 videos. The next one will be seed starting, and then we'll do a planting your garden one as well.